We are recording. Okay. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Also with you.
God, I thank you for the opportunity to come together and learn more about you, about your church, about your will for us, and about the way that we have been made in your image and what that calls us to in our lives. We thank you for the opportunity to gather on Zoom when we can't quite gather in person yet, and we look forward to gathering in person together one day soon. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. So, hello. We are starting off this September series of Ordinary Courageous Christians, which is a really cool opportunity for us as we live through unprecedented times, as we have often said, to think about what it means to be a Christian in a world that is confusing, unsteady, different than we thought it was going to be. These next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about 3 different people who have inspired us because of their courage, and talk about not just who they are and what they've done and their accomplishments, but really what about them makes them courageous Christians, and how can we understand what it means for ourselves to be courageous Christians in our own contexts. So today we are talking about Dr. Catherine Meeks, who is like my personal hero in the Episcopal Church. So I'm so excited that Aaron couldn't be here for this class, because it means I get to teach on Catherine Meeks. And Catherine Meeks is the director of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta. It's out of the Diocese of Atlanta, so it's an Episcopal ministry, which is very cool. And we're going to learn a little bit about her and talk about kind of what we can learn from her and her example, and how she has been a courageous Christian in her own context, in her own life. So what we're going to do is listen to a short segment of a podcast that she is on and has started, called A Brave Space Podcast. Creating a brave space and creating a place to talk about hard topics in candid and frank ways is kind of like her thing. It's what she does best. And so we're listening to like 5 minutes of this podcast. It is quick. There's a lot of information in it. And then we are going to like unpack it. So if you feel like you've missed something at the beginning, never fear, because we'll talk about it. So I'm going to share my screen for just a second. Cool. And actually, hold on. I'm working on getting good audio for this.
Welcome to a Brave Space Podcast.
I'm your host, Chelsea Glasgow. The Brave Space Podcast will support the work of the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in its mission of creating brave space where the truth can be told. I am so honored to be sharing this platform with you, Dr. Meeks. How are you?
I'm well, and it's great to be here with you, Chelsea.
Yes, excellent. Would you please start to share with our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yes, well, I've been doing this work for the last 50 years, and so it's really a vocational thing for me, and not just something that's kind of an academic endeavor. And the Center for Racial Healing is the outgrowth of about 10 years worth of work in the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta that started out with me chairing the Commission for Dismantling Racism, and moving our work in a way that caused us to become a resource for the entire Episcopal Church, thus making it possible and viable for the presiding bishop and the Diocese of Atlanta to form a partnership to create the Center for Racial Healing, which is a resource for the whole church. And so the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing, which is located across the street from the Atlanta University Consortium, is a resource for the entire Episcopal Church in the United States and 11 countries.
Wow. So for those who have never been to the Center for Racial Healing, who have never participated in any programming, could you please enlighten them about what you all do?
Well, we've organized pilgrimages, book studies, film studies. We have Dismantling Racism classes and workshops. We have a Dismantling Racism youth curriculum for 6th to 12th graders. And we also are the place where the campus missioner for the Atlanta University complex is housed. And since that's your work, Chelsea, you should tell the audience what you do.
Yes, yes. So I'm the campus missioner of the AUC. And so that is the Atlanta University Consortium that includes Spelman and Morehouse College, as well as Clark Atlanta University. And my job there is pretty much to access the students in a way that helps them grow spiritually and develop. And so we have a myriad of programming that goes on, including reaching students because they are stressed. And so we have spa days. We also have Bible studies to increase their spiritual acumen, as well as other activities like cooking classes. And so it has been a really great experience to connect our mission with the Center for Racial Healing's mission, because at the same time, the students of the Atlanta University Center are standing on the shoulders of those in the Atlanta student movement, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's really important that our students at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, understand whose shoulders they're standing on. And that has a lot to do with how they move and develop. And so we've been in partnership, and so that has been a great and lovely experience.
And it's a great experience for us as a center because our job is to work all over the United States in 11 countries, but we would be very derelict in our responsibility if we didn't relate to young people who are directly across the street from us. And this work has to engage young people, or else we're completely missing the mission we should be on. So I'm incredibly excited about the intergenerational aspect that we can have and how easy that happens because we're there together and we're so much on the same page.
Yes. You know, I think that if we reach our youth, we will be in better shape for our future. I know you had experiences when you were younger that started you in this work. Could you share what that
Well,
was?
the major thing was growing up in Arkansas, in segregated Arkansas, with a sharecropping father who was illiterate, and my mother who was a school teacher who graduated from college the year that I graduated from high school, and embracing the segregated Arkansas culture and realizing that there was something deep in my heart that resisted that and knew that wasn't the way things should be. And then also hearing my father talk about the death of my brother who died because we were Black and poor and couldn't get access to medical care. So growing up with that environment and that kind of backdrop of that family history really pushed me forward to let me find out how you can be free in this country. How can I be liberated? And that effort to find out how to get to inner liberation as well as outer liberation has been powering my journey for these 50 years of doing this work.
Wow. 50 years of doing this work. That's
Okay. We could listen to a lot more of what she has to say because she goes on to really talk about some interesting perspective and understanding more about the history of slavery in this country. And there's a lot to learn from Dr. Meeks. I could sit at her feet and just have her speak to me for hours, and I would be happy to do it. But for the sake of time, we'll just leave it at that. Something that I really wanted to point out in that story, the little clip that we heard of Catherine Meeks introducing herself and talking about her life, is she's an ordinary person from an ordinary context. And she gets introduced at the beginning of, here are the things that you do. You have this curriculum, you do all these things, you go on pilgrimages, you've written books, you speak around the world, your resources are used in 11 countries and part of the Episcopal Church. But when she talks about herself, she's a girl from Arkansas, and she has that context. And she has done great things, and that's not to discount anything that she's done, but she's rooted in just who she is, where she came from, her context, and she's chosen to use her gifts and her experiences to bless the church and to bless the world. And so she's fantastic. And something that I wanted to point out in case you missed it or don't know about it, so she runs the Absalom Jones Center for Racial Healing in Atlanta. And that name is on purpose. And if you don't know who Absalom Jones is, I want to give you a brief 2-sentence introduction to him so that I can kind of put some context into why it's called that. So Absalom Jones was an African-American priest in the US. He was born into slavery in Virginia and was eventually freed and then paid for his wife's freedom. And he became the first ever African-American priest ordained into the Episcopal Church by an Episcopal bishop. He's one of the founders of the AME tradition. And he is remembered in the Episcopal Church on February 13th. He has like a Saint's Day, and we remember him and celebrate his life and legacy. And I want to give us a chance to kind of talk about those two people and the legacy that they've left in this country and kind of what we can learn from them. But something that I think is really important to note and to think about is Catherine Meeks grew up in a very difficult situation of segregated Arkansas. She talks about her father was illiterate, and she lost her brother to basically like medical racism in the sense that doctors wouldn't accept her brother. And Absalom Jones was born into slavery and ended up becoming the founder of a whole like network of churches that exists to this day and serves people of God to this day. But neither one of them necessarily woke up and thought, you know what, I'm going to work for a center of racial healing in Atlanta when I'm older and get a PhD and teach ethics at a university. But they came from that context, and they choose every day to be ordinary and courageous Christians, to make the world a better place and to serve God in their contexts. So to start a conversation with y'all, what's striking about that story to you? Is that striking to you?
Yeah, it's ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Like you were saying, Addie. I think it's to fight circumstances that you were born into that are against you to start with. You're actually less than ordinary, so to speak, as far as society is concerned. And to be able to do extraordinary things is to use the word that we're using today, is courageous. It's you have to have courage to be able to do that and to stand up for that which is right, being all equally created in the eye of God. Both of them, one's a modern day example and one of them's a century old, or more than a century old, but courageous examples.
Yeah. Dr. Meeks spoke at the 79th General Convention for the Episcopal Church, and she talked about kind of what made her do the work that she does and why like this Center for Racial Healing is like her passion project and the thing that she'll do forever. And I'm going to quote her here because I'm going to say it in the first person, but it's because of her quote. My father's struggles made me make sure that I make a decision way deep down in the core of myself that I was not going to be immobilized and disempowered. It was out of the promise to myself that I went to look under every rock to try to find truth to live an empowered life. Which I think is cool. I think it's really easy. I think about this on All Saints Day every year, that we look to the saints as these people who lived fabulous, incredible lives and did miracles and did all sorts of things that we look to and think, well, I'm not St. Francis. I'm not going to go found an order and give away all my possessions to the poor and be on this pedestal of sainthood. So clearly sainthood is unachievable. But Catherine Meeks, we look at her and we think, wow, you run this whole center, like you are like heralded by the Episcopal Church as being this person to go for wisdom and strength. And she just wakes up every day and thinks, I want the world to be better than the world that I grew up in. Which is so simple and so courageous.
So isn't it true after Absalom Jones was ordained that he was not still allowed to have a church though? It took a while. I thought I heard that story actually just this week or last week in one of my...
I mean, historically African Americans did not have their own churches. It wasn't until the free churches came about after sort of the Civil War when there wasn't pew rents. Like St. Stephen's in Charleston is an example of that, Amy, that welcomed people of all races, creeds, whatever, into their congregation. And the church was set up as that. But until then, the Episcopal Church, unfortunately, it was a colonial church and you had to buy your pew. And so anybody that wasn't white couldn't afford a pew. So therefore, having a black minister was just unheard of. So his ministry really was sort of a roving ministry at first.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a tease, you know. Okay, we're going to let you go to seminary. Sure. Okay, you're smart. You can do the book work, but now we're not going to give you that responsibility. We're not going to, you know, he had to push forward for that. You know, he didn't let that bring him down. He just, I don't know the whole story, but I did hear that, which was kind of interesting that he would, you know, not be allowed to do the thing he went to school to do.
Yeah.
It would kind of be like Thomas going to school to be a doctor, and then they're like, well, yeah, you've done all this, and then we know you passed the medical, you know, you passed your bar, or was it a bar? No, it was a board. The board. But you know what? You just need to like go be an assistant in the ER or something and be a nurse because you're Thomas. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it would kind of be like, I would think. You know, you set yourself on this career. Only this is, you know, for him, it's.
Yeah, I think something that is both this one of the scarier parts of like having a real and true faith, but also the most freeing part of having like a deep faith and trust in God is the fact that we're all called to many different things in our lives, and we're probably not called to do anything else that somebody else is already doing, which is both terrifying and very exciting in the sense that like Absalom Jones and Catherine Meeks are both doing what God, well, Absalom Jones did what God called them to do, and neither one of them could have looked to the person who came before them and said, oh, clearly this is the path that I'm meant to take. This is obviously the way forward, because they're kind of forging their own path and doing something that only God could lead them to, which is also cool because it means that each of us has the opportunity to do that too, to listen to God and to discern a call to anything that he can call us to. It's exciting.
I think it's interesting too that for both of them, I think a key part of their story is their roots, and in one sense, roots are very ordinary. Like everyone has roots, but in another sense, it's really courageous to kind of like look at what your roots are and to stay grounded to those. And a lot of people try and do extraordinary things, like leaving who they were behind because they're like running away from it. But in a sense, both of them did it by sort of like looking at where they came from and rooting in that as to what they were doing moving forward. So in a sense, it's kind of courageous to have that introspection and like look at what you're grounded in, who you were, and what you can then do with that.
Yeah, and something that Dr. Meeks talks about in her like racial healing curriculums and the things that she does, she talks specifically to a lot of white congregations and a lot of groups of white people who have come to her to say, we don't want to be racist anymore. How do we do that? Just tell us how. And we want to, but she talks to groups of white people to say, you are white, you're not going to wish away being white. Look at your root, look at your context, look at who you are, where you come from, the people and the places and the churches and all sorts of things that have shaped you. And then you take courage from that and you say, this is who I am, this is where I've come from, these are my roots. What am I called to be courageous about in my context? You know, as members of like a large church in downtown Greenville, like what can we do with our place and space to be courageous there? We will never also be a church in California with a whole different context, and they're called to be courageous in their context, in their way, which is exciting. So thinking on this time of coronavirus, of the world being partially open, partially closed, what can we do in our context to be a courageous Christian, or a courageous Christian community even?
watch a film, start a book study.
Yeah. We have this gift of time, that if you might have been doing things or had plans get canceled, we had this unexpected time to sit and learn and read. Maybe not you, Thomas, you're in school, but the weekends. But we have this gift of time to reflect and to connect with people, and that more things are being offered online now, where we might not have been able to hear a great speaker because they're at a conference you didn't go to. Now things are online or on Zoom or YouTube, and you can connect more than ever.
In this time, who knows what things would look like politically, socially, if we didn't have this pandemic. So many people have, I don't want to say that it's because of the pandemic that people have all this time that they're able to demonstrate and rally and whatnot. I can't say that. But I've been able to engage in conversation with people I would not normally engage in conversation with, just because things look differently. We're able to gather. We're not supposed to, but I've had more conversations in Greenville because of this unrest. And I don't know why that's caused. I don't know what the starting point of that is. But the fact of the matter is that, I've had conversations with people I never would have had before, in light of everything that's going on. And I think it might be like one of those, those toys where you swing the ball and it hits the other ones and they just go back and forth. I think, all of it kind of culminates. Coronavirus, political unrest, social unrest, it all just sort of came together. So I've tried to kind of grab that by the horn, so to speak, and have conversations with people I normally wouldn't have. I wouldn't have been out sitting in the city, in front of the Peace Center for a Black Lives Matter march under normal circumstances, but we aren't going into the office right now. So when we go out and talk with our mayor who goes to our church, Knox, and stand with him and talk to people and figure out what's on people's hearts and minds. You get a perspective what other people think.
Yeah. And I think all of the opportunity to gather, protest, march, rally, just think collectively. This is our context. This is where we come from. This is the time that we're living in Greenville. This is the time that we're alive and discerning a call from God of where does the church go next? What is my role as a Christian in this movement? Whether it's to be involved, to not be involved, to pick a side, that's a decision that you're making regardless of what it is, to listen to God, to listen to your faith and where the Spirit is leading you. I'm sure this is the moment. I'm sure people will look back on 2020 and all that has gone on in 2020 and say, oh, that's when all these things started. Things that are just people are starting to rally together for ideas or, whatever causes are coming out of this. They're starting now. And this is our chance to listen to that call, see where God is leading us. And the four of us here won't all be called to the same thing. And that's good.
And I feel like it's created a way too to reach out to people that you may not normally have either been able to reach or normally been able to interact with. Like even as a church and something like this, some people aren't able to make it to church normally who are able to see it. They're either abroad or young or old or unable to travel, or two people who are scared of like an organized church who happen to see a video on Facebook. They're like, oh, I'll click on this. But they never would have like walked in the front doors of many people they never knew.
Good point.
A whole new creation of the community.
Yeah. I think I know I've been an Episcopalian for a long time, so I'm really comfortable with the Book of Common Prayer. But I know that people coming to church for the first time, you just get handed a book and then you flip to pages, especially if you're doing morning prayer with the BCP right now. Like there's so much moving and flipping around. Like it's not a very accessible service if you're brand new. But like in this age of COVID, we have like single-use bulletins where you don't have to know that, this collect is from over here, and then we flip to a psalm, and then we did all this extra stuff. You just read through it and you're like, this is so easy. Maybe I'll come back to church because I know it. And then we'll do a BCP class and you can get the full range of all that's in there.
Or when we are in normal times, the service starts on page 323. Like, what? Why does the service start on 323, not page 1?
Yeah. And then it's like, well, this is the hymnal. We're not singing hymn 323. Excuse me, what?
Thank goodness that we're not starting on page 1 for that child who was like, we're almost done. The worst part is over.
Imagine handing that child a BCP and being like, we're going to read the whole thing.
Thank you, service.
This is
1,000
church.
pages. Yep.
So we're all part of Christ Church. We're a part of this community and rooted in the context. What do you think is something that we could do as a church that we could be working on in this time of COVID to be different going forward? It doesn't have to be massive, but like, what are we called to in this time?
I think one thing's kind of just finding a grounding in like smaller communities, like virtually through things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a very large church that sometimes can feel very large. And this creates ways in which you can make it feel smaller and reach smaller groups of people kind of around the community.
Right,
Yeah,
Addie?
you're absolutely right.
We have a way to do that. We just started it. Small groups.
Sure. I think something that's been really neat about all this online church kind of stuff is the fact that we all have our names in the corners of everything now. I think there's such a barrier of a church that's as large as Christ Church of if someone forgot their name tag, or like, I know my hair is usually in front of my name tag. So there's that barrier of like, oh, I should know them, but I don't quite remember them. It's too awkward to ask for their name at this point. So maybe this has made church a little bit easier because you can get really familiar with somebody with like that constant reminder of their name. And then we are back together for church. You can be like, oh, I really know that person's name because I looked at it for 12 weeks in the corner.
Unless your name is Galaxy 10.
Yeah, right.
We all have a Galaxy 10.
I think it'll bring a rejuvenating energy back too when everyone finally does return.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be kind of exciting to see.
Yeah.
Thomas, where are you in med school? Up here in Greenville or down in Charleston?
I'm up here in Greenville.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, grew up here, went away for a couple years, and then came back 2.5 years ago.
Cool.
Welcome back.
So at the end of this year, you'll go to residency somewhere? No, you're in residency now.
One more year. So I'm here for another 2 years.
Okay. Do you know what you're gonna do?
I have no idea. Every day I keep having less and less of an idea.
Well, it kind of all depends on what you match with too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that exciting or scary or both?
Both. It'd be nice to have some direction, but it's kind of also exciting to know the whole world's your oyster and to allow yourself to kind of soak up everything and be excited about it and see what you like, what you don't like.
Yeah.
And have the time to do that, which a lot of people don't have.
It's a good attitude to have.
That's true. I mean, that's kind of like that direction thing. You know, you're like, oh, I'm on this path. Don't let anything steer me. But your path right now is there's lots of things that you can experience along the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know. So,
It's also a nice time for introspection because a lot of, like, you have to kind of figure out what's important for you as you go into choosing different specialties and what they offer and the people you'll interact with and what it gives you the flexibility to do, and sort of taking that time to sort of sit and think about what's important to you and how that applies to like what you will do as a career is a nice exercise, I think.
do you have an ethics class, or is that depending on what path you choose?
Sorry?
Do you have an ethics class, or is that depending on which path you choose?
There's a little bit of curriculum and ethics. I I studied it a lot more beforehand, and so it's kind of something I've tried to like apply myself to medicine. You get a little bit of it, but not a whole lot, not nearly as much as is needed.
Are you on LinkedIn?
I think I made an account in high school or something, but that I haven't logged into now.
So there's
Your
an
dog
ER,
walker?
there's an ER doctor, Louis Profeta,
Mhm.
actually gave the book to Leo Overly to let her Thomas read.
Hmm.
It's called The Patient in Room 9 Thinks He's God.
Mhm.
And he wrote this book, but he on LinkedIn, on his blog, he posts stories about his experiences. He writes really well, and they're just, I don't know how many words are in those stories, but it's like one of them recently was about a teenager that comes into the ER that's been drinking and he's mutilated, because he's been in a car accident, and how he has to address parents when he gives them whatever news it is,
Mhm.
which is certainly bad or good, but probably more often bad. So it's more like a letter to the parents than it is really to anything else. But he's got a really interesting perspective. He's actually Jewish, but his ethics are unusual, I will say.
Mhm.
You want the book, Charles?
Nope.
Patient in Room 9 says he's God.
Intriguing.
Yeah, I was up at Duke before this and started a master's in theology and medicine. And a lot of what we worked on is sort of how you shape conversation and the importance of how you say what you say, and like how that applies to what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Well, medicine, we all have the opportunity in every occasion of interacting with somebody to see them as a child of God before we decide anything else about them. But medicine gives you, I think, even more of a perspective and the ability to do that. Like instead of a diagnosis or a case number, it's child of God first, and also whatever it is they've come to the hospital with. But much easier said than done when you're busy and stressed, and we'd all love to do that at all times to everyone who cuts us off in traffic or is being slow at the grocery store and all that.
It's funny, the emergency department's the great equalizer. You have the CEOs and the homeless people show up and you can't tell the difference.
Mhm.
All you see them as is the same person in front of you. And you don't know who's in which room and what their background is.
Did you come across Stanley Hauerwas while you were at Duke or not?
I never took a class with him, but a lot of my friends did.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool guy. He's more so, he crosses over more on the ethics of law and theology, but he's one of the leading ethicists at Duke or in the country, actually.
Yeah, it's one I really wanted to take a class with, but didn't.
It always happens that way. Well, Charles, would you like to close us in prayer?
Sure.
I
Cannot take credit for this prayer. Addie sent it to me. It's a beautiful prayer. So the Lord be with you.
And also you.
Lord our God, what can separate us from your love? Can trouble or fear or persecution or hunger or nakedness or peril or the sword? In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Dear Father in heaven, we long for courage. You will answer our prayers and again grant us strength, the power of your Spirit, the only power that can strengthen us. We thank you for all you have done for us. Help us onward from victory to victory until everything on earth is won for the good to your honor among all humankind. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks for coming to our newest iteration of Young Adult Sunday School. Aaron Bush.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron Johnson is a parishioner at Trinity. Aaron Bush will be back next week to lead our conversation, which will be exciting. Next Thursday from 6 to 7. Is it next Thursday? It's this Thursday. From 6 to 7, we have a young adult happy hour. Anyone is welcome, but just a chance to hang out, get connected, kind of take a pause from the business of the world for an hour. More information on that is on the website. So y'all are welcome to it. Yeah, have good weeks. Let us know if we can be of any prayer or helpfulness to y'all, you and Charles, Amy included. Have good weeks. Good to see y'all. Good to meet you. Yeah.